everybody. Episode 809 of the podcast is Swimming America, the Outdoor Sports Podcast. It is Monday, December 18th, 2023. People, I hope everybody's doing. I hope everybody is having a great day. Cannot believe a week away from Christmas, 2 weeks from the new year. But here's the good news. Torres is still here for you. I ain't going anywhere. And we got ourselves a jam-packed Monday episode of the pod. Here's what you need to know about today's show. We'll open. Have you seen what's going on with Georgia football? Players hitting the portal, recruits visiting other schools. Aaron Murray, friend of this pod and Georgia legend, called out the program and the players on Friday. What is going on at Georgia? Should Dawgs fans be worried? From there, quick break. We got to give you a portal update. It's just crazy. A lot going on. You need to keep up with it. This is a big sign for college football next year. But then we got to go to college hoops. Kentucky beats North Carolina. You know I got thoughts. How about my Purdue Boilermakers? Everybody knows Torres loves Purdue more than anyone loves anything. They take care of number one Arizona. UConn beats Gonzaga. So we got ourselves a jam-packed show. Buckle in. College football, portal, college hoops. And with that said, there is no more time to waste. So let's get to the topic of the day. And the topic of the day, well, let's just say this. Life comes at you fast sometimes. And if you need a lesson in that, just go ahead and look at the Georgia Bulldogs. The last time we talked about the Georgia Bulldogs on this show, at least on the field, they were the belle of the ball. Everybody in college football was looking up at them in the standings. Georgia on a 29-game win streak going into the SEC championship game. They were the number one team in America, unbeatable, hadn't lost a game since the 2021 season, hadn't lost a regular season game, which I guess they still technically haven't, since the 2020 season. Everything was going good for Georgia. Then they go to Atlanta. They play a hard-fought game against Alabama. They end up losing. Now, because of the way everything else broke, they weren't really an at-large candidate. Think you could argue they were one of the four best teams in college football, but probably didn't have a resume to get into a 14 playoff. And so I bring it up because you go into the offseason and you think it's going to be a pretty quiet offseason for Georgia as they get ready for signing day and that Orange Bowl with Florida State. Why do I bring it up? Well, it has been anything but quiet for the Georgia Bulldogs. And frankly, look, let's be blunt here. Like so many other programs in college football, the offseason started like it did for, again, 132 other programs. Lost a player or two in the portal. Then another one. Then another one. Then another one. Then another. And all of a sudden you look up, and this is where it got interesting. Late last week, you're losing players, but it's mostly backups. It's mostly guys that weren't going to see the field, whatever. Then late last week, Jamon Dumas-Johnson, one of the star players of your 2022 national championship run, a linebacker. You start to hear rumblings that he's going to enter the portal. He does. On Friday, A.J. Harris, a former five-star cornerback in the class of 2023, just completed a true freshman year in which he appeared in 7 games. He enters the transfer portal. In total, Georgia now has 18 players in the portal. And beyond that, as we discussed on last week's show, Dylan Raiola, the number one quarterback in America, according to 24/7 Sports, has been committed to Georgia since May, moved to Georgia to play his senior year of football. Well, this past weekend, he was on campus at Nebraska, visiting Nebraska. His uncle is an assistant coach there. His dad played there. And it looks like, for all intents and purposes, he is about to flip to Nebraska. Maybe by the time you listen to this segment, he has. And so I bring it up because, listen, there's an argument that attrition happens everywhere, but 18 players in the portal, plus the number one recruit in America, or at least the number one quarterback, according to 24/7 Sports, may flip. And it has led to a lot of people asking, is there something wrong with Georgia? By the way, not just me, not just Torres making stuff up. Maybe the more prominent Aaron in college football media, certainly the more prominent one, because I didn't throw for any touchdown passes for Georgia. But Aaron Murray, star at Georgia, came on this show about a year ago before Georgia's national championship game appearance against TCU. He put out a tweet on Friday that caught my attention. Here is what Aaron Murray tweeted. I'm going to read it verbatim so there's no confusion. He said, I don't know if I have ever seen this many 5-stars leave a program before. What in the world is happening in Athens? These top recruits not liking all the competition? Question mark. And so I bring it up because, listen, this isn't message board fodder. This isn't Aaron Torres, me trying to make up some narrative that's anti-Georgia. Even people in the Georgia community are wondering, is there something going on? Is there a bigger picture issue? What the heck is going on at Georgia? Well, I'm here to talk about it, and I'm here to say this. One, it's certainly not great, certainly not ideal, certainly not exactly what you're hoping for if you're a Georgia Bulldogs fan. But what I will also say is, like so many other things in life, it's a little bit more complicated than maybe meets the eye. Now, in terms of the negatives, I'm not going to beat around the bush. You never want to lose 18 players in the portal. And just to make sure that I wasn't missing anything, I went ahead and reached out to somebody that's pretty close to the coaching staff on Sunday morning. I knew I was going to be talking about this on Monday's show, and I reached out to somebody that knows that staff well, and I just said, I just said, hey, it's Torres, and I'm just curious, like, am I missing something? Is there, and more importantly, not only am I missing something, but more importantly, of the Georgia guys that actually left, how many of them are guys that Kirby didn't want to lose, right? Because you know how the narrative goes. You lose a bunch of, well, we were expecting all these guys. And this guy told me point blank, talks to the coaching staff all the time. He said, look, Torres, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. There were 2 or 3 guys that they did not anticipate losing and that they did not want to lose. Jamon DiMaggio-Johnson was one. Yes, he got hurt late in the year. Yes, he has a capable replacement behind him, but I don't think they were planning on losing him, one of the star players of their title run a year ago and a star player this past season. A.J. Harris, the cornerback, who we'll talk about his first visit in the coming segment, they were not planning on losing him. So I want to make that clear. Before I get to why this is not quite as big of a deal as a lot of people think, I want to go ahead and say, if anyone tries to tell you that Georgia did not lose a single player that they wanted to keep, that's a lie. And every team loses players that they want to keep this time of year, and Georgia is no different. At the same time, though, I do think that context in this situation matters. And context is where I'm not as worried about Georgia as everybody else is. In terms of the 18 portal players, let's dive into the portal players, okay? So one, what I would say, it is worth noting, like whether you like Georgia, hate Georgia, whatever, the bottom line is that this is something that happens everywhere in college football, right? And that is important to note. It's bigger because Georgia is one of the 2 or 3 biggest brands in college football right now, the 2-time reigning national champion, because their players are more high profile, because they recruit more 5-stars, they're going to lose more 5-stars. And so I think it's important to note, everybody loses players this time of year. Go ahead and look at Texas A&M. Texas A&M lost probably 7, 8 super high-profile players over the last couple weeks. Many of them are players that their fans would want to keep. You go on down the list. Florida, I think you could argue Florida lost its best offensive player in Etienne and its best edge rusher who just committed to Ole Miss. We'll talk about him in a minute. By the way, Etienne is trending towards Georgia for everybody that's freaking out. So the idea is everybody loses people, even good players, even good teams. By the way, the only schools that you don't really hear much about right now are the ones that are in the playoff. Alabama hasn't really lost that much, but guess what? When the season ends, they're going to lose guys that they probably don't want to lose. Same with Texas, same with Washington, same with Michigan. This is part of how it all works. 2, I do think it's worth noting, it's a little bit of a unique circumstance at Georgia as well. 1, it is worth noting, one of their marquee assistant coaches left to take the head coaching job at Syracuse. His name is Fran Brown. He's from the Northeast area, and he went to Syracuse. And so with him, a guy that had as good a relationships as anybody in that building walked out the door. Doesn't mean players don't like Kirby. Doesn't mean players don't like the other coaches. That's not what I'm saying. But he leaves. All of a sudden, a couple guys enter the portal, and I've already seen 1 or 2 of them commit to Syracuse. So that's part of it as well. But more importantly, here's the other fact, is that even these really good players, there are other good players playing with them and competing with them for spots. And while I love Aaron Murray, this is not a criticism in 1 second of 1 sense of what he said. the bottom line is even the players that have left, even the super high profile players, there was no guarantee there was playing time because Georgia is so freaking stacked at pretty much every position. You look at somebody like Jamon Dumas-Johnson, as high profile as anybody in the portal, but he got hurt in early November. And guess what happened? A 5-star kid from last year's recruiting class named CJ Allen stepped in, took his starting spot, and was really, really, really good. And you're not going to not play that kid next year. And so Dumas-Johnson, it's almost, I don't want to make an apples to apples comparison, but, he kind of said, look, I had the spot. This kid came in. Maybe I need to go somewhere where I know I'm going to have the spot again. And it's not that he doesn't want to compete. I'm just stating a fact, right? AJ Harris, the corner. Go ahead and look at that cornerback room. Malachi Starks, unbelievable. He's been unbelievable since the day he stepped on campus. There are other high-profile corners in that building. And oh, by the way, guess who the number one cornerback in the country is coming into next year in this current high school class? Kid named Ellis Robinson, who plays at IMG Academy. Now, he's from New Haven, Connecticut. Shout out to Connecticut. Produces all sorts of good football players, including me. But Ellis Robinson, number one cornerback in the country, is coming in. And so a kid like AJ Harris, he sees guys in front of him. He sees guys behind him. I'm not saying that you don't wish he stayed and competed. It certainly helps your depth, but he decides to leave. And so that's part of it. And I think the last part is exactly what I said. Go ahead and look at those 24/7 recruiting rankings right now. Now, I get it. Dylan Raiola, we'll see what happens. But you know who has the number one class in the country? It's Georgia. Georgia's the number one class in the country, 28 total commits. I think it's 10 of the 28 are in the top 100 players nationally. I think about 21, 22 of them are 4 or 5 stars. And so there's a lot of talent coming in. First of all, simple math equation. Quote my buddy JJ Redick, it's a math equation, F-head. That's me. He called me an F-head for people who have never heard that JJ Redick rant. But I bring it up, and I'm all over in this segment, by the way. Great way to start the show. But I bring it up because it's a math equation. They don't have 28 guys graduating. They have 28 guys coming in, and you got to start to figure out the scholarship situation. A lot of them are at positions where the players that left were getting recruited over. And so I just bring all this up to say, I'm not going to go on and on. You kind of get the point. But when I look at the Georgia situation, I'll be blunt. I'm not really that worried. One, they're still as talented as anybody in college football. They have the number one recruiting class coming in. You even look at somebody like Dylan Raiola, who we didn't even talk about, that quarterback who's visiting Nebraska. Part of it is that Carson Beck is probably going to come back next year, and Dylan Raiola is not going to see the field. And you can like it, you can hate it, but I think he's going to Nebraska, or he plans on, or it appears as though he's going to flip to Nebraska because of the fact that he's sitting around saying, well, wait a second now, at least at Nebraska, I can see the field. I might not start right away. I might not start day one, but I'll have a chance. So when I look at Georgia, I know everybody's freaking out. And I'm not going to lie, there are players in that program that I know the coaching staff wanted to keep. But while the number is big, 18 players, oh my goodness, sound the alarms. I don't think it's quite as big of a deal as everybody makes it out to be. All right, that's what we're going to do. Take a quick break, come back. When we come back, we're going to talk about the portal, including a couple of those players we just mentioned who took visits this weekend. We'll do some college hoops after that. We got ourselves a loaded Monday show. Quick break. Be right. All right, everybody. I'm back. Good to be back. I do want to continue the college football conversation, and I do want to talk about a topic that we talk about quite a bit this time of year. That is the college football transfer portal. I know we do a lot of these segments, but as I tell you all the time, these are the moves that are being made in December largely set the tone for the next college football season. Guys are leaving, guys are going, guys are committing, guys are visiting. And you look across the college sports landscape, the portal now is as important as it's ever been. And so what I like to do, once or twice a week, just get you caught up on what happened, the visits, the commitments, the things that you missed. And by the way, I always tell you, this stuff moves fast. It's about 6 o'clock Eastern time, maybe 7:30 Eastern, whatever. You get the point. About 7:30 Eastern time, stuff is changing. Some of it might be outdated, but I'm going to give you the best news as I can in real time. And where I want to start is actually where we ended the last segment. Because in the last segment, we talked a lot about Georgia, all the guys leaving. But hey, It's basic science, right? There's the old saying, what goes up must come down. Well, in the transfer portal, it's like you go in one side, you come out the other. Everybody that enters the portal, in theory, leaves it somewhere else. And so I want to start with a couple of those Georgia Bulldogs because there appears as though there could be a pretty big winner of some of these players deciding to leave Georgia. That is their longtime rival in the Deep South's oldest rivalry, the Auburn Tigers. How about our guy, Hugh Freeze? Okay. So for people who did not see this, we just mentioned some of the big names. One, the cornerback, A.J. Harris, really good player. Entered the portal, I think it was Thursday or Friday. But this was a kid. He was the number 2 ranked cornerback in the class of 2023 a year ago. Played in the first 7 games for Georgia, was an impact player early, kind of got worked out of the rotation late. But he enters the portal. Well, as soon as he does, he ends up on Auburn's campus on Saturday. And so you look at the type of player that Auburn simply did not have before Hugh Freeze got there. This is the kind of kid that, used to be in the mix for Auburn. Brian Harsin essentially stopped recruiting. We don't need to go relitigate the whole Brian Harsin thing, but these are the kind of kids that Auburn needs. I believe Auburn's going to get there under Hugh Freeze. Listen, I haven't gone back and looked it up, but my guess is that Hugh Freeze during his time at Ole Miss would have made a 12-team college football playoff at least once or twice. And as we enter this 12-team era, listen, Alabama's still always going to be on the schedule. Georgia's always going to be on the schedule, and you need difference makers to compete with those schools as well as everybody else in the conference. LSU, Texas, Texas A&M, Oklahoma. Well, Hugh Freeze has done an incredible job in the high school ranks. Several prominent high school players are committed and expected to sign on Wednesday. But I bring it up because you need help in the portal too, and this kid, A.J. Harris, appears as though Auburn makes sense and Auburn is a potential lead. Thought it was interesting. He is from Phoenix City, Alabama. If you don't know the geography, that is literally right up the road from Auburn, about 20 minutes away. And why I bring it up, one of the top high school players in America, A.J. Harris's former high school teammate, I believe, Cam Coleman, is committed to Auburn. So there's ties between the school. There's geographical ties. Easy for mom and dad and family to get down to see you. Don't know if he plans on taking any more visits, but this would be a big one, the kind of kid Auburn needs. Speaking of Georgia to Auburn, maybe a new pipeline. Jamon Dumas-Johnson. I don't even know if we've talked about him, to be honest. So this kid might be the best. Let me even backtrack. I don't think I was dramatic enough. I don't think I had enough effect right there. So late last week, Jamon Dumas-Johnson, we did talk about it last segment, but I don't know if we talked about it when he entered. This kid might be the single best player in the portal, a superstar at Georgia, a huge part of 2 national championship teams, was one of their best defenders in that national championship run of a season ago when they beat Ohio State and TCU to win the national championship. Well, he entered the portal early this week. He actually took 2 visits this weekend. The first one to the Auburn Tigers. By the way, if I didn't mention it, I mentioned it last segment, but Jamon Dumas-Johnson, 70 tackles last season, 9 TFLs, 4 sacks. Unfortunately, was banged up a little bit this year, but still ended up with 5.5 TFLs. I bring it up. He decides to leave Georgia for all the reasons we just discussed. And why it's important is he took 2 visits. The first to Auburn. Again, Auburn, they just don't have these kind of dudes. And you talk about the kind of kid that could step in, play right away, have an impact right away. This is the kind of kid that could absolutely do that at Auburn. This ain't Bama. This ain't Georgia. This ain't Ohio State. You go in there, you are the alpha. You are the lead dog. He was the lead dog at Georgia, no pun intended. Imagine if he goes to Auburn and the impact that he could have there. It is also worth noting, good friend of mine, Justin Rowland, who works for the Kentucky Rivals site, he actually put out a report on Sunday that Jamon Dumas-Johnson also visited Kentucky. You talk about the impact that kind of commitment would have. Now, listen, Kentucky's defense has always been great. Some criticize Mark Stoops. If you want to, that's fine, but you can't criticize the defensive effort. But you get that kind of kid out of the portal, that would be unreal. By the way, credit to Mark Stoops, who has done an awesome job in the portal so far. We've talked about it, but Brock Vandegrift, the Macklin kid out of North Texas, the list goes on and on and on. And by the way, speaking of shout out to Mark Stoops, how about the shout out to Kentucky fans? Mark Stoops called to action after you lose to Georgia. Hey, we got to get that NIL train working. I was critical of him when he did that, but I bring it up because, listen, I don't think you're competing for a lot of these players if bluntly in 2024 you cannot pay. So shout out to Mark Stoops, but more importantly, shout out to Kentucky fans for taking care of business. By the way, speaking of coaches that have had some interesting comments about NIL, remember a few years ago when Lane Kiffin was whining and complaining about NIL? We're buying players. This is the new world we live in. How did we get here? He said Texas A&M needs a salary cap because they're spending so out of control. Well, Lane Kiffin right now has the #1 portal class in America at Ole Miss, and it's because of major work that he has done the last couple weeks. And again, I don't think you get these kids if you aren't ponying up. And by the way, those are the rules. I'm not complaining. I don't care. Go get your money, young men. These are the rules that we have set up, et cetera, et cetera. So I bring it up because Lane Kiffin and Ole Miss have had a very busy weekend. Tyler Barron, ironically, of all places that he played at Tennessee over the last 4 years, emerged into one of the best defensive linemen in the SEC over the past season or so. That was a kid that this past season had 10 and a half TFLs, 6 sacks. He ends up committing to Ole Miss this weekend. Also worth noting, Ole Miss also got the best edge guy from Florida. Not even going to try to pronounce his name. First name is Princely. Don't want to disrespect him or offend him or whatever by announcing his name wrong. But that was a kid that was maybe the best defensive player in the portal when he was in it before all these new additions over the last couple days. Well, he commits to Ole Miss on Friday, and so Ole Miss is doing work in the portal. Juice Wells, the wide receiver from South Carolina, he committed previously. Key Lawrence, a veteran defensive back who played at both Oklahoma and Tennessee, committed. They got another defensive back from Tennessee, Tamari and McDonald. So you talk, by the way, Lane Kiffin, 3 guys he has committed who at one point played in their careers at Tennessee. Can't make this stuff up, only in college football. All right, so I mentioned that Lane Kiffin and Ole Miss have the #1 portal class right now. You know who's #2? It's the Colorado Buffaloes. And listen, I just did an extended YouTube clip on the YouTube channel if you want a deep dive onto this Colorado class. But why I bring it up is for this reason. It is because I think Coach Prime is actually doing a little bit underrated work in the portal this offseason. And what do I mean by that? It's that, look, a lot of negativity, a lot of heat that he took over these last couple months as Colorado struggled. But why it's important to me, why I think this is all worth discussing, is because when you look at last year and you look at next year, last year he took a ton of kids in the portal. And everybody said, oh, well, he's taking more kids in the portal. He did it last year. It didn't really work out. The difference is this year, I believe that Coach Prime is taking kids that last year I think he had to fill roster gaps and was taking a lot of kids that I don't think he would have taken this year. Yes, you had the elite players like the Travis Hunters, but outside of him, Shador, a couple others, I think there were a lot of guys that I think Coach Prime wouldn't have taken if he didn't have to. I bring it up because this year he's getting dudes that everybody wants, okay? So on Sunday, Quincy Wiggins, a former 4 to 5 star, depending on what recruiting service you look at, commit to LSU. He is a defensive lineman. We know that defensive line is an area of need for Coach Prime. Was an elite high school prospect, many believe to be the best high school prospect in the state of Louisiana during his recruiting cycle. He ends up committing to Colorado. Also worth noting, I know that wide receiver is not necessarily an area of need, but Colorado on Sunday also picked up a commitment from Cordell Russell, who is a former top 100 player, played at TCU last year, and then also added the Wade twins who played at Kentucky earlier in the weekend. Keaton Wade is a linebacker who was monstrous for Kentucky this year. 51 tackles. I think it was about 5.5, 6 tackles for loss. And again, I mentioned Justin Rowland, Nick Roush, whoever covers Kentucky football, follow them and ask them the impact that this kid had at Kentucky last year. This was a kid the staff did not want to lose, but he ends up leaving. He ends up entering the portal. He had a lot of interest from a lot of big time schools, and he chooses Colorado. His twin brother, Destin, who's a quarterback, will now be the backup at Colorado as well. They also got a commitment from Preston Hodge, an elite defensive back. So that's what stands out to me about Colorado. Just spent a ton of time talking about him on the YouTube channel. But I bring it up because now they are getting guys that everybody wants. Last week, it was the offensive lineman, Matthew Bedford from Indiana. That was a kid that Auburn was desperately after. Khalil Benson, also from Indiana. A lot of people were after him. And so I just bring it up to very simply say, Coach Prime's getting dudes that people want. Now, it's on him to take them to the next level, but I think he will. 1-11 to 4-8. Next year's roster is no doubt going to be better. And lastly, let me say this. He ain't done yet, man. Signing day is coming on Wednesday. I know he's got a trick or two up his sleeve. The portal, I don't think he's stopping until that portal shuts down. He's going to keep trying to upgrade that talent. I think the cool thing is with the portal, so many of these guys are going to come in over these next few weeks for winter workouts. So you get everybody in, you get this process started. I actually can't wait to see what Colorado looks like in 2024. And then I think the important part is too, you don't have to be quite as aggressive in the spring cycle if you do enough work here in the fall. Couple other notes before we get out of here. One, Kyle McCord. By the way, shout out Torres. The day Kyle McCord, he was Ohio State starting quarterback. The day he entered the transfer portal, I said 2 schools. I said, I've heard from sources. It'll either be, I didn't say it'd be either or, but I said Louisville and Syracuse were 2 schools that made sense for Kyle McCord. A couple days later, Louisville takes a commitment from a kid named Tyler Shuck. I'll be honest, I don't really like that commitment for them. Jeff Brom's done a lot of good stuff. Don't agree with taking him as your quarterback because that's a kid that has an injury history. But on Sunday, Kyle McCord committed to Syracuse. Think this is a good fit for him. This kid, 24 touchdown passes at Ohio State. I think he's going to be good in the ACC. He's not elite. He's not CJ Stroud. He's not Justin Fields. But he's not as bad as Ohio State fans make him out to be either. And so I think it's important. Remember, the new Syracuse head coach, Fran Brown, is a monster. Was a assistant at Georgia, but he's from the Northeast. He has recruited very well for Georgia. All those Georgia players from Pennsylvania. They got a few kids from Rhode Island, New York. I don't know if they have any Connecticut kids. Need some Connecticut kids, Georgia. But I bring it up because he is now the head coach at Syracuse, and they are already doing work. Zeed Haynes, a former 4-star wide receiver who began his career at Georgia, just committed. Texas A&M, a couple of their players were on campus this weekend. Of course, the new Syracuse defensive coordinator is Elijah Robinson, who was Texas A&M's defensive line coach. Point I'm trying to make, Syracuse is kind of one of those teams to just keep an eye out on because they are very, very interesting going forward. Going to see really quick, make sure I didn't miss anything. You know, Malik Murphy, the backup at Texas, he entered the portal. He's already got visits set up to Duke. He's got Duke, Baylor, and Oregon State, I believe, were the 3. Those are the 3 that he is going to visit. Let's see what else. Who did I miss? Dante Moore was on campus at Oregon this weekend, so we'll see what happens there. I think that's it. A lot of good portal news. We'll probably do another one of these later in the week. National Signing Day is coming. A lot of recruiting, but if you love college football, this is also a fun time as well. By the way, make sure to follow CFB Transfers on Twitter and CFB Transfers on Instagram. All right, this is what we're going to do. Take a quick break. Come back. When we come back, switch gears 360 to college hoops. Kentucky beats UNC. How about my Purdue Boilermakers? Love me some Boilermakers. They took care of Arizona. A lot of college hoops coming up. Quick break. Be right back. I'm back. Gonna be back. So what I want to go ahead and do is switch gears to college hoops. But what I want to do is I'm going to actually split the college hoops into 2 different segments. Last Monday's show, I talked college hoops, and the segment ended up being like 35 minutes of nonstop Torres blabber. And so I said, you know what? I'm going to break this into 2 segments because we had such a big weekend of college hoops. And really that's what kind of stands out, right? Is that it's just interesting to me is that last Monday I said, oh, this is the best weekend of college hoops that we had. And then this weekend comes starting with Gonzaga, UConn on Friday night. We obviously had number 1 versus number 3, Arizona, Purdue on Saturday. You know, Torres got a lot of thoughts on that one. We had Kansas, Indiana. We had all sorts of big matchups that I want to get into. But where I want to start the college hoops is what I believe to be the single most entertaining game that I watched on Saturday, which also doubled as a really important game with a really important result. And that was in beautiful Atlanta, Georgia, as the Kentucky Wildcats face the North Carolina Tar Heels in a true matchup of blue bloods. None of these fake conversations about who's a blue blood, who's not. Kentucky and Carolina absolutely are. And in this game, Kentucky takes care of Carolina, final score 87-83. Let's go ahead and dive in. So a couple things stand out. The first thing is, if you listen to Friday's show, we had Mark Starziak from Intersport on the show. Intersport is the marketing company that puts together these events, picks the venues, books the arenas, whatever, blah, 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 this and that. I bring it up because one of the things that I asked him on Friday's show, I keep saying Monday, it was Friday. Okay, it was Friday. Forgive me. Days are all coming together here. It's almost Christmas. But one of the things I asked him on Friday's show is I said point blank, how do you choose the venues for this event? And what he said was, and I asked him because I said 4 different teams, 4 different coaches, everybody wants something advantageous to him. And he kind of went through everything. It was a fun interview. If you missed it, I encourage you to go back and check it out. But I bring it up because one thing he said was like, look, there's a lot of variables that go in. But number one, what is the fan experience? Is it near some of the fans so that we can get good crowds in the arena and make it a positive fan experience? I bring it up. This year it was in Atlanta, and boy, oh boy, oh boy, did that venue, did that arena deliver. I saw them say this on the broadcast. Atlanta is almost to the mile, the same amount of mileage from Lexington, Kentucky to Atlanta as opposed to Chapel Hill to Atlanta. And so that second game in that arena, you could feel the energy through the TV. I hate, and it gets annoying when we do the cliche of it felt like an Elite Eight game in December, but it kind of sort of did. Like, it was a great atmosphere. The fan bases appeared to be split 50-50. Everybody I know that was in attendance said the arena was loud. And so we got a great product, great environment. And then we got a great product on the floor. And so where I want to go now is to the game. And the one thing that stands out, I could, and I say this all the time, but I could go to the 11-minute mark of the first half or an 8-0 run in the second half, whatever. Where I want to start is with 5:05 to go in the game. Because to me, that tells the whole story of this game and largely of Kentucky's season. Because for the first time in that game, it was back and forth, but Kentucky was always in control. Kentucky always had the lead until the 5:05 mark when North Carolina took its first lead of the game. And a team full of freshmen easily could have folded. They could have panicked. They're playing a team that literally played in the Final Four for a national championship 2 years ago. And instead, they immediately come down, get a bucket. They immediately go on a 6-0 run. Hubert Davis immediately calls a timeout, and they end up winning the game 87-83. But to me, that moment in time is a microcosm of this Kentucky team. It's a microcosm of this season, and it is a microcosm of what I have told you about this group. I've said it since they played overseas in the summer in Canada. Guess it's not technically overseas, but you get the point. But what I've said, this group is different. Believe in the freshmen, and it proves a narrative that I have told you time and time again is true as well. I keep hearing from all these other college hoops experts that, freshmen don't win in college basketball in 2023, 2024. And what I keep saying is, if the freshmen are good enough, you don't have to worry. And Kentucky proves it as late those star freshmen they stepped up. How about this? They fall down 72-71. 14 of the final 16 points for Kentucky are scored by freshmen as they pull away and win late. And so when I break this game down, when I think about this game, those two things stand out. One, it's all about the freshmen. And if you hear from any of your favorite college hoops personalities besides me, and I'm probably the best one, let's be honest, or at least I'm your favorite. Unless you're a Purdue fan, then you probably hate my guts. But one thing, I respect the hell out of the guys and girls that cover this sport. But the notion that you can't win with freshmen in college basketball in 2023 is the dumbest crap I've ever heard in my life, okay? Go back to last year. Who was the number 1 seed in the NCAA tournament, the number 1 overall seed? It wasn't Purdue. It wasn't whoever you think it was. It wasn't UConn. It was Alabama. Alabama won the SEC regular season. They won the SEC tournament, and they did it with a team that had 4 of their top 6 scorers as freshmen, including Brandon Miller, the number 2 pick in the draft, Noah Clowney, who was a first-round pick, I believe, Jaden Bradley, who was since transferred. The point I'm trying to make, number 1 team in the country last year, 4 of their top 6 scorers were freshmen. Oh, by the way, Duke, the hottest team in college basketball going into the NCAA tournament, 9 straight wins, win the ACC tournament. What were they? 4 of their top 5 scorers were freshmen. And so that narrative never made sense. This Kentucky team proves it. If your guys are good enough, if your guys are tough enough, if they believe in themselves and they are fearless enough, it does not matter. And so that was my biggest takeaway. And then my second biggest takeaway is exactly what I just said. These Kentucky Wildcats, they are different, man. I just look at this group. And again, I know I just said it, but in that moment, you're down to a veteran team. Armando Bacot's a 5th-year senior. RJ Davis is a 4th-year senior. You got a bunch of 4th, 5th, 6th-year guys in that lineup. Paxson Wojcik, Cormac Ryan, Harrison Ingram is a 30-year college player. And it was Kentucky's guys who made all the plays late. And so this is why I have told you since the summer, this Kentucky team is different. They're fearless. You look at that group. Rob Dillingham, nothing phases. I am amazed by that kid. That kid, he is one of my favorite college basketball players that I have seen over the last couple of years. And I know Reed Sheppard gets all the accolades, understandably. But Rob Dillingham, just everything rolls off that kid's shoulders. He reminds me of an old school Calipari player. A kid that, takes 4 or 5 bad shots. Cal's screaming in his ear. Okay, coach. Got it, coach. No problem. And he's smiling and he's laughing, almost like that John Wall energy, that, whoever, that Tyler Ulis energy, Jamal Murray energy. Like, coach, don't worry, I got this. And then he goes out, hits a bunch of big shots late, 17 points. Reed Sheppard speaks for itself. If I was putting together a first-team All-American list right now, Reed Sheppard would be on it. Elite offensively, elite defensively. I know I've said it a million times. Makes 4 or 5 plays a game that nobody else in college basketball can make, that don't show up on the stat sheet. Tip passes, deflections, getting your hand in and loosening. Like, he just does so many big things. Thought DJ Wagner played his best game. And oh, by the way, Aaron Bradshaw, 3 games into his college career, had some huge plays down the stretch, including that offensive rebound that led to some foul shots. He makes the foul shots. It was unbelievable to watch. And this team has been unbelievable as well. And so listen, we've done the whole upside. How good are they? Listen, I watched everybody in college hoops of note. They could beat anybody. You mean to tell me you beat North Carolina on a neutral court? You smack Miami at home. You're within a bucket or 2 of beating Kansas, who might be number 1 by the time you listen to this on Monday. You mean to tell me that they can't beat anybody? By the way, they lost to Kansas without any of their big guys. And so this is a really good team with a really high upside. And I want to go ahead and give credit to somebody that never gets any credit. How about we give 30 seconds of credit to John Calipari. And I know what the anti-Kentucky people say, oh, he has the best players every year, blah, 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 this and that. Well, first of all, I saw a stat that stood out to me. It said that John Calipari now, how about this? Since he got to Kentucky, he's faced North Carolina 7 times, with North Carolina ranked in the top 10. He is now 6-1 against North Carolina when they are ranked in the top 10. So don't tell me it's all about him having better players. I think North Carolina has pretty good players too, especially when they're ranked in the top 10. But it's kind of wild because every time that I see criticism of him, I'm not saying he's not immune to criticism, but it's like every time you see criticism of him, he pulls out a game like this and you see a stat like that where you're like, wait a second, he's 6-1 against Carolina when they're ranked in the top 10. He's 8-4 since he got to Kentucky against Carolina overall. I would love to know how many teams in the last 15 years that have played more than 10 games against Carolina have a 66% win percentage against them. My guess is it's not very many. So shout out to Cal, shout out to this team. I am so excited to watch them develop and get better. And lastly, for Kentucky fans, let me say this. I hope you enjoyed this one, man, because I will say, as an outsider who has no skin in the game, it is kind of crazy to me. Like, the early part of the Calipari era just felt like you had these huge games like this, and Kentucky always came out on top, right? I was at the original big Calipari game, which was when they played UConn at the Garden with John Wall in 2000. I guess it would have been the winter of 2009 into 2010. And John Wall makes that big play late, that big and one. unfortunately against the late Stanley Robinson. And Kentucky wins that game, and you're like, oh my God, this is incredible. And for the first 3 or 4 years, every single big game, Kentucky found a way. They won the big ones when it mattered. And it's been a while since it felt like that for Kentucky. Now, I'm still a believer. I think a lot of things have gone against them over the last couple of years. Some recruiting stuff with Shaedon Sharpe. I said this the other day on an interview that I did. I think that COVID hurt them more than anybody. That 2020 year, you don't have time to bond with your talented young players. But then I think it really hurt recruiting for a year or two because they couldn't do in-person evaluations. But I just bring it up because I've never believed that things are as dire and as dark as they have seemed. Kentucky gets their big signature win. Congrats to them. Really quickly from the Carolina perspective, let me just jump in and say very briefly, I actually, first of all, I liked Carolina in the preseason. If you remember, I had them in my preseason Final Four. And at that time, I got mocked by all the experts on social media, all the fans, like, oh, of course you like Carolina again. It's like, I like Carolina because I think they're good. But two things. What did I say in the summer? I said, it's clear to me that I believe that Hubert Davis has basically painted this as a Caleb Love problem. Now, Caleb Love, to his credit, has been awesome at Arizona. So if we got Arizona fans, I'm not criticizing Caleb Love. What I am saying is it probably wasn't the right fit at Carolina with him. And it appears as though it was the best for all parties for him to move on. And it certainly has worked out well for him at Arizona. But I bring it up because I said with Carolina, I said they're older players, they're veteran players. And what I see from that team is a group. I think Hubert Davis, it's year 3, but I think he finally has a group that the guys that he has play the way that he wants to play. Fast, a lot of threes, spacing, that one big guy down low. Remember, Roy Williams used to famously play those two big guys. And so I think he is kind of coming into his own as a coach in year 3. A lot of people, including myself, were very critical of him early. And I think what this proves to me is that sometimes it just takes time. Sometimes it takes time to find yourself as a head coach. Sometimes it takes time to find yourself as a recruiter to figure out the style of play that you want to play. And I think Carolina's going to be really good this year. Go ahead and look at the ACC. Miami's not very good. Duke is not as good as I thought. Virginia's good, but Virginia's kind of Virginia. We kind of know who they are and what they're about and what they're going to do well and what they're not. And so you look around, Carolina's going to get a lot of wins in the ACC. Tough one on Saturday, but I think they're going to be just fine. By the way, talk about a quick turnaround. They play Oklahoma this weekend, or this week, excuse me. I think it's Tuesday or Wednesday night. Oklahoma's undefeated right now. Don't know how many people know that. Porter Moser has that team rolling. So Carolina either going to bounce back nicely or they are going to hit a little bit of some skids going into ACC play. I think they'll be just fine, though. I actually really like this team. All right, knew I was going to go a little bit long on the Kentucky stuff. So let's take a quick break. Let's come back. And when we come back, we will look at the rest of the weekend in college basketball. Purdue-Arizona. Was it the refs? No, not this time. Not this time. Purdue fans, back off. We'll talk Purdue-Arizona, UConn-Gonzaga, Indiana-Kansas, much more. Quick break. Be right back. All right, everybody. I'm back. Gonna be back. Final segment of the show. So good to be back. And I do want to go and wrap with the rest of a very busy week in college hoops. We obviously just talked Carolina, Kentucky. Let's get to everything else, and let's start with the big one. Number 1 Arizona undefeated in Indianapolis against number 3 Purdue. Now, if you listen to this show over the course of the last week, I have certainly had a very interesting week with Purdue fans as it pertained to Zach Edey and foul shots and foul discrepancy and all of this and all of that. Well, I'm here to say, once again, the refs ruined everything. No, I'm just kidding, Purdue fans. I'm just kidding. Get off my back. What I will say is I actually thought the refs largely stayed out of the way. I actually thought it was a very entertaining game. And Purdue fans, listen closely. The better team won. Congrats to Purdue, who knocked off undefeated Arizona. And I think, frankly, bluntly, I do think Purdue not only has an argument to be number 1 come Monday in the AP poll, I think they should be number 1 come Monday in the AP poll. So let's go ahead and dive in. Let me start by saying this, and I said it on Friday's show. And I don't want to sound arrogant, But I do think the discourse that I inadvertently started about Zach Edey, I do think it was a conversation in college basketball this past week. I heard from multiple head coaches at the highest level that said, Torres, don't 100% agree with you, but glad that you at least brought this to light. And so I think it was a conversation. Nate Oates made his own comments. He's certainly entitled to his opinion. And what I think we saw was refs conscious of over refereeing either side. By the way, Arizona's a very physical team as well. But you just look at the stats, they back it up. First off, I thought this was interesting. I tweeted it out. Purdue fans got offended, whatever. But first 9 minutes of the game, there were a total of 3 fouls called. And as a matter of fact, from the 16-minute mark to the 12-minute mark, there were 0 fouls because they went straight from the beginning of the game through the first TV timeout into the second TV timeout. And so in total, we had 35 foul shots in the game compared to a week ago when Purdue shot 28 themselves. And what it led to was a largely entertaining game, a back and forth game, and a one where, to the credit of the referees, they got out of the way. By the way, I'm not saying referees should never call fouls. What I am saying is, as Patrick Mahomes told us last week, nobody shows up to watch the referees. And I'm glad we saw what we saw on Saturday. So that way, especially on a show like this, on a day like today, we leave no doubt. Purdue was the better team. Purdue deserved to win. What's especially interesting about this game, by the way, it wasn't really Zach Edey that was the reason that Purdue won. And we talked about this last week, by the way, with Arizona as well, or with Alabama when Purdue beat Alabama. Beating for Purdue to win at the highest level, for them to get all those demons off their back from a year ago. And, that's another conversation for another day. It's not about Zach Edey. He's going to get his 25 and 10 at minimum. And it's really on the other guys on that team and in that program to go ahead and take care of business. And on Saturday, that is exactly what they did. Purdue, in that game, Fletcher Lawyer, one of their starting guards, I thought had the best game that I have ever seen him play, 27 points for him. And Braden Smith, who was the reason that Purdue beat Alabama last week, as I said on this show at the time, had 26 points himself. In total, they combined for 9 3-pointers. Zach Edey got his 22 and 9, thought he did a good job passing out of the double team, finished with 5 assists. But I just bring it up because Zach Edey is not the reason they won the game. The refs are not the reason they won the game. The reason they won the game, they got great guard play, and I think that is going to be the key for the rest of the season. From the Arizona perspective, listen, I don't think there's like a major meltdown takeaway to have, okay? Tommy Lloyd said it after the game. He said, we weren't going undefeated. That was never going to happen. We're going to have days like this. And I think really from Arizona's side, the only thing that stands out, thought the defensive effort was a little bit disappointing. Not that they gave up this many points, but like the effort was disappointing. This has been an elite defensive team. We talked about this last week. I said everyone's so focused on Arizona, their ability to put the ball in the basket. I think they're a top 10, top 15 field goal percentage defense. At least they were coming into Saturday. And so, by the way, when I say Arizona needs to tighten up the defense, doesn't mean that Purdue doesn't deserve credit. But for Arizona, listen, you went to a road environment. You fell down early. You went to that 2-3 zone. I don't know how much 2-3 zone Arizona plans on playing the rest of the year. I'm guessing it's not that much. But I just bring it up because, to me, what became obvious in that game was that I just don't think that they were ready for the intensity of the game, of the atmosphere. A lot of Arizona fans there, but it was obviously a very pro-Purdue crowd. And so I think they're going to bounce back, and I think they're going to be fine. There was nothing that I saw there that made me say that every goal that this team has, they can't reach. Win a national championship, go to their first Final Four. Can you believe this? They haven't been in the Final Four since 2001, 22 years for Arizona. That is unbelievable. So I just bring it up because I didn't see anything that makes me feel like they can't do it, right? Sometimes you watch these games and you say, I don't know. I don't know about that team. Nothing from that perspective, made me feel like Arizona is in any big picture trouble. Finally, let me say I'm back to Purdue for half a second. And this is funny. By the way, this show, I don't dislike Purdue. I had some questions coming out of last week. I still do. I hope we get more games like that, less like Alabama and Tennessee earlier in the year. But why I bring it up, I think Purdue should be number 1 in the country coming into today. And there is a debate. There is a conversation about what's going to happen in March. They have a monkey to get off their back. But what you cannot deny, they have the best resume in college basketball right now. They were number 3 coming into this weekend. They beat number 1 Arizona. They've beaten Marquette on a neutral. They've beaten Alabama on a neutral. They've beaten Tennessee on a neutral. And so Kansas, who we'll get to in a minute, they won at Indiana. I respect them, but the bottom line remains that if I was voting, if Purdue was at number 3, I don't care that Kansas is at number 2 and they didn't lose. I think Purdue deserves to be number 1. Credit to them. Some of the other results from the weekend. Let's go back to Friday. Let's talk a little bit about the UConn Huskies versus the Gonzaga Bulldogs. By the way, shout out to Torres. I gave out picks for all of these games on Friday's show. Picked Kentucky to beat UNC, picked Kansas to beat Indiana, but for it to be close, picked UConn to smack Gonzaga. All of them except for Purdue-Arizona happened. So I got pretty much every game right except for Purdue-Arizona. But from the UConn-Gonzaga perspective, this game went exactly how I told you it would. Not a knock on Gonzaga, but they just don't have the same caliber of dudes they used to. Why is that? Tommy Lloyd, their lead recruiter, is now the head coach at Arizona. Arizona has the number 1 team in the country going into the weekend. And so when I saw this game, I just said, Gonzaga doesn't have the dudes. They didn't on Friday night in Seattle, and UConn does. For UConn, if you want a positive from traveling 3,000 miles from Stores to Seattle, it is that your star center, Donovan Clingan, looked like the All-American we expected in the preseason for the first time this year. This is a guy that dealt with a foot injury in the preseason. He's dealt with nagging things since the season started. And by the way, he's faced other really good big guys. Hunter Dickinson at Kansas. The big guys from Indiana are tough. Khalil Ware and those guys. Armando Bacot last week against UNC in New York City. So this was the best game he played. 21 points. He had, I think, like 8 of the first 10, something like that. But UConn, it was never really in a doubt. Gonzaga did everything they could. They threw zones at them. They pressed them. They did this. They just didn't have good enough players. Like, sometimes that's really how simple it is. One team has better players than the other team. From the UConn side, though, one thing that stands out to me, and I think you could say this about Kentucky as well. I didn't mention this with Kentucky a minute ago, but you look at Kentucky, all of their best players have not all played at their best at any time this year. For Kentucky, Aaron Bradshaw is just coming back from injury. DJ Wagner's had ups and downs. Justin Edwards really wasn't even a factor in the win against Carolina. For UConn, it's kind of the same. That's the part that keeps jumping out to me, is that against Kansas, Tristan Newton was the star, 30-plus points. I think he should be a first-team All-American in the conversation for that. Cam Spencer was probably the best player against North Carolina, but Tristan Newton wasn't great. Tristan Newton was great against Indiana, but not great against Texas the following night. Alex Karaban has been up and down. And oh, by the way, Stephon Castle, projected lottery pick, is still coming back from an injury. And so what's crazy to me, there is another gear for UConn to get to. I would be mortified if I was a team in the Big East, because I don't believe that all of their best players have all played their best on any night this year. And they've beaten Carolina by double digits. They've beaten Gonzaga by double digits. They've beaten Texas and Indiana by double digits. Only loss was to Kansas at Kansas. Cam Spencer was hurt. Donovan Clingan was coming back from injury. Stephon Castle didn't play. And that's not to discredit Kansas. It's just a state of fact. I think there is another gear for UConn to get to. So that is just something scary for the rest of college basketball. Gonzaga, it just reminded me of last year in the NCAA tournament. They played UConn in the Elite Eight, and UConn just had better players. There was nothing Mark Few could do. There was no play he could draw up. There was no timeout that he could call that would have resulted in something different. So really excited for UConn. Listen, I do think there is a top tier in college basketball forming. Purdue is in it. Marquette is in it. Arizona is certainly in it. Not worried about Arizona after that loss. Kansas and UConn is obviously in it as well. UConn, by the way, done with out-of-conference play, opens Big East play. I believe it's Tuesday night. It's the 20th. So we'll do some quick mental math here. It looks like Tuesday night against Seton Hall. Then how about this? Big Rick Energy rolling through Stores next Saturday, baby. That's right. St. John's at UConn, Saturday night primetime Fox game. Get your popcorn ready. A couple other results. Kansas beats Indiana at Assembly Hall. This game largely went how I told you it would. I said Indiana is going to be competitive at home. It's Kansas's first road game, but Kansas gets the win. Listen, I saw a lot of blaming the refs, and obviously I am not a guy that if I believe that the refs are having a bad day, that I am afraid to tell you exactly how I feel about the referees. I don't think the referees were the reason that Kansas lost this game, or Kansas won this game and Indiana lost it. Indiana had a 13-point lead in the second half. They could not hold on. Kansas made their run. Indiana had 14 turnovers in the game, just 10 assists on those on 25 made baskets. Missed 7 free throws. The discrepancy in free throws, for those of you who say, Torres, how come you criticize Purdue for the free throws, not Kansas? Well, the discrepancy was +2. That's not why Kansas won this game. Kansas won this game because they had better players down the stretch that made bigger plays. DeJuan Harris was awesome. Kevin McCullough was awesome. Listen, if you haven't watched Kansas, let me say this. What stands out to me about Kansas, Hunter Dickinson is obviously the biggest name that they have, okay? And he's playing, largely like an All-American. He finished the game with 17 points and 14 boards, similar to the stat line he had against Kentucky earlier in the year. But why I bring it up, Kevin McCullough is, in my opinion, the best player on this team. And I think you can argue he's a first-team All-American. This was a guy, how about this? He finished this game with 21 points. In addition to the 21 points, he also finished with 6 rebounds, 4 assists. And what stands out to me is that this is a guy that is leading this team in points, or he's second in points behind Hunter Dickinson. 7 rebounds per game, 5 assists per game. He's their best wing defender. Now he's shooting 38% from 3. This speaks to what I say every single year. Bill Self is maybe the best talent developer. There are guys that maybe evaluate better. There are guys that put more guys in the pros. But this is a guy that second year at Kansas is now playing like an All-American after Jalen Wilson did the same last year, after Ochai Agbaji and Christian Brown did it 2 years ago when they won the national championship. He is playing like an All-American. Quickly from Indiana, I don't know what else there is to say about them. And it kind of amazes me, some of the people that cover college basketball, because I saw all these people, Indiana, is this what you expect out of Mike Woodson? They're 7-3. They have no great wins. Their losses obviously are to Kansas at home on Saturday. In addition to that, they obviously lost to UConn earlier in the year, and they lost to Auburn on a neutral. So they have no great wins. And I saw a lot of is this what you expected when you hired Mike Woodson? You understand, when you're criticizing Indiana, you get that their starting point guard, Xavier Johnson, is out, right? You criticize a lot of teams for a lot of things. What would North Carolina be without RJ Davis? What would UConn be without Tristan Newton? What would Kentucky be without one of those great guards? And so I just don't I don't understand these people that are paid to watch these games that don't understand a simple concept like the point guard did not play. What did I say on Friday's show? I said, Kansas is going to win. Indiana is going to cover. If Xavier Johnson plays, I think Indiana wins. Xavier Johnson isn't perfect. Turns the ball over too much. Is a little bit erratic. But he changes the game when he's in the lineup. And so if you lost to Kansas by 4 at home without him, probably means you would have gotten the win. A couple other results, Michigan State destroyed Baylor. I'm not here to say that Michigan State's figured things out. I think they are who they are. Their backs were against the wall. The game was in Detroit. Big game, big day in the city. They obviously had Saturday night football with the Lions hosting the Broncos. But Michigan State gets the win. Poor Alabama can't catch a break. 3-pointer at the buzzer, rims out. They lose to Creighton. I think that's it. College hoops. It's fun, right? By the way, kind of a weirdly busy week in college hoops. Alabama plays Arizona. Arizona on Saturday plays Florida Atlantic. UConn, as I said, opens Big East play. Creighton versus Villanova in Big East play. Boy, oh boy, big week. By the way, Kentucky, Louisville on Thursday. Just to warn you, your boy Torres is going to Thursday night football. Saints, Rams, got a couple tickets going, sitting in the stands, having some beverages. So if we get the upset of the century, you're going to have to wait till maybe after Christmas for Torres to react to Kentucky, Louisville. But it's actually going to be a busy week in college hoops. And then obviously we're going to get through the new year. We'll get through the holiday, that week between Christmas and New Year's, a lot of bowl games, whatever. What I'm trying to make, we ain't slowing down anytime soon. All right, if you're not subscribed to the Aaron Torres Sports Podcast, please make sure to do so. Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, Google Music, wherever you listen to podcasts, make sure to subscribe. Also, make sure to rate and review the show. Go ahead, give us a quick 5 stars. Let us know what you like, what you don't like, all that good stuff. Make sure you're following on social media at Aaron_Torres on Twitter, at Aaron Torres Pod on Instagram, Aaron Torres Podcast Questions at gmail.com, Aaron Torres Podcast Questions at gmail.com. Make sure to follow if you're not subscribed on YouTube. Remember, YouTube channel just crossed 30K. We're maybe potentially closing in on 31K. I think we can get to 35K before the new year, but cannot do it without your support, so make sure to subscribe there. Time for me to get out of here. Appreciate everybody's support, and we will talk again soon. Shout out to Torrin Craig. Shout out to Rachel, who hates my voice. Shout out to JJ Reddick, you F-head. Unblock me. By the way, Pat McAfee unblocked me. Pat McAfee's actually doing great work. Listen to like an hour interview he did with Matt Rule. It was awesome. So McAfee, I like you, bro. Unblock me. I'll be back on Wednesday. Busy week. National Signing Day Wednesday. New episode. Aaron Torres Pod.